the hand connected with the marble countertop, a sharp crack that echoed the fractures in her composure. Alara Vance, known here only as Leah, did not flinch. She had learned long ago that flinching was a reward, an admission of pain that the world, and specifically men like Marcus, were hungry to receive. So she stood perfectly still, her spine a rod of defiance, and continued polishing a silver water pitcher that was already gleaming with a sterile, impersonal light. The sound had come from Marcus Sterling, her former partner in both life and work, as he slammed his fist down to punctuate a point she had stopped hearing minutes ago. He believed volume was a substitute for validity. What happens next will change everything. He thought he had her trapped, a bird with clipped wings working a menial job in the cavernous lobby of the Grand Criterion Hotel. He was wrong. He had underestimated her, and he had no idea who was watching from the shadows. To see how she finally breaks free, you need to be here for the whole story. Subscribe to see how this unfolds. Her silence was a canvas onto which he painted his own narrative of her submission. She was not submitting. She was enduring. There was a difference. Enduring was an act of quiet, protracted warfare. It was the long game, played by those who had nothing left to lose but the very core of themselves. She had been playing it for 6 months, ever since she had walked out of their shared penthouse apartment with a single suitcase and the ghost of her own architectural genius, a ghost Marcus now paraded around as his own. She had left because the arguments had escalated, his professional jealousy curdling into something possessive and ugly. He had not hit her, not then. His violence was more insidious. It was in the way he'd dismiss her ideas in meetings, only to present them as his own a week later. It was in the way he'd isolated her from her friends, calling them distractions. It was in the slow, methodical erasure of her name from their shared projects, demoting her from partner to associate to, finally, a footnote in the acknowledgments of a monograph celebrating his visionary talent. The final straw had been the broken drafting pencil, snapped between his fingers as he loomed over her desk, his voice a low hiss as he told her she was nothing without him. She had looked at the 2 clean halves of the pencil, a perfect symbolic break, and had realized he was wrong. She was not nothing without him, but she might become nothing if she stayed. So she ran. She changed her name, bleached her dark hair to a nondescript honey blonde, and took a job that was so far beneath her qualifications it served as a kind of camouflage. Polishing silver, clearing tables, smiling with an emptiness that mirrored the lobby's vast, indifferent space. Here, she was invisible, and for a time, invisible had meant safe. Yesterday, that safety had been tested in a different way. A man had left his table in the corner alcove, a quiet figure in a suit so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it. He had been there for hours, nursing a single glass of scotch, reading financial reports on a tablet. He moved with an unhurried grace that was the opposite of Marcus's performative swagger. After he left, she saw it. A wallet, black leather, heavy, sitting on the plush velvet of the banquette. It was an object of quiet, confident wealth. Her training dictated she turn it in to the concierge immediately. But she had picked it up. The leather was soft, worn just so. She opened it, compelled by a curiosity she hadn't felt in months. The driver's license read, Julian Thorne. The face was severe but handsome, with eyes that seemed to assess the world with a calm, unnerving stillness. Behind the license was a partition, and behind that, a thick, pristine stack of $100 bills. She did not count them. The thought of taking one, just one, to ease the crushing weight of her precarious existence flickered and died in an instant. Her integrity was the one asset Marcus had never been able to touch, the one blueprint he could never steal. It was the foundation of the woman she was trying to rebuild. She had walked it to the front desk, handed it to the concierge, and said simply, "A guest at table 12 left this." She had pushed it across the marble, a small act of returning a piece of a world she no longer belonged to. She had not left her name. She had not wanted a reward. She had only wanted to do the right thing and retreat back into her cloak of invisibility. But invisibility was a temporary shield. Now Marcus was here. He had found her. The fist on the countertop was his opening salvo. Did you hear me, Alara?" His voice was low, meant only for her, but it carried the familiar threat of public escalation. "This little game is over. You've had your fun playing the victim. You will come home." "This is my job, Marcus," she said, her own voice so quiet it was barely a whisper. She kept her eyes on the picture in her hands. To look at him was to give him power. "This is not a job. This is a disgrace," he sneered. "You are an architect, my architect. You have an obligation. The Peterson proposal is falling apart. They need your touch. I need your touch." He reached out, his fingers wrapping around her upper arm. His grip was not merely firm, it was a brand. Ownership. "We're leaving. Now." She did not scream. She did not struggle. The first rule of survival she had learned was that panic was a fire that only consumed the person who lit it. Instead, she spoke with a cold, clear precision that belied the terror hammering against her ribs. "Let go of my arm." Marcus laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Don't be ridiculous. You're making a scene." It was a classic piece of his psychological warfare. Accuse her of the very thing he was doing. People were starting to look now. The hushed, expensive atmosphere of the lobby was disturbed. A ripple of discomfort was spreading. "Let go." Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall between them. It was then that another voice entered the space. It was not loud. It was not angry. It was a low, resonant baritone, steady as iron wrapped in silk. "She asked you to let her go." The voice came from the alcove, the very same one where the wallet had been left. Julian Thorne was sitting there, a newspaper folded neatly on the table beside him. He had not been there a moment ago. Or perhaps he had been there all along, a part of the scenery she had failed to notice. He rose to his feet. He did not rush. He was not performing. He moved with a deliberate economy of motion, each step a statement of intent. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him with architectural precision. His presence was a gravitational force, pulling the attention of the entire lobby into its orbit. The lobby manager, a man perpetually flustered, had been scurrying towards Alara and Marcus, his face a mask of professional panic. He stopped dead when he saw Julian Thorne. The name, the face, the sheer aura of command. It was a language every employee of the Grand Criterion understood. This was not a guest. This was a sovereign visiting his territory. Marcus turned, his face flushed with irritation at the interruption. "This is a private conversation," he snapped, trying to reclaim his dominance. But his voice was a little too loud, his posture a little too stiff. He was an actor who had forgotten his lines. Julian Thorne did not look at Marcus's face. His gaze was fixed on the white-knuckled hand clamped around Alara's arm. "This is a 5-star hotel, not a back alley," he said, his voice remaining level, almost conversational. "You are causing a disturbance, and you are assaulting a member of the staff." "She's not staff," Marcus blustered, his grip tightening. A flicker of pain crossed Alara's face, a crack in her perfect composure that she hated herself for revealing. "She's my wife." It was a lie. They had never married. It was another claim of ownership, a title he was trying to bestow on her like a brand. Julian Thorne's eyes, a cool, clear gray, finally lifted to meet Marcus's. There was no heat in them, only a kind of profound, dismissive finality. "No," he said, the single word carrying the weight of a court ruling. "She is not." He gave a nearly imperceptible nod, a gesture so small most would have missed it. But two men standing near the entrance did not miss it. They were dressed in the same quiet, expensive suits as Julian, their professionalism a stark contrast to Marcus's unraveling bravado. They moved smoothly, silently, flanking Marcus before he even registered their approach. They did not touch him at first. They simply stood there, their presence an undeniable physical reality. I think it's time for you to leave, Mr. Sterling, Julian said. The use of his name was a scalpel, precise and cutting. It told Marcus that this was not a random stranger. This was someone who knew exactly who he was. Marcus's face, which had been a blotchy red, turned a sickly white. The ecosystem of power had shifted beneath his feet. He was no longer the apex predator in the room. He was prey. He released Alara's arm as if it had burned him. The two men, gently but irrevocably, began to guide him toward the door. "You can't do this," he sputtered, his voice cracking. "I have a contract with her. I'll sue you. I'll sue this whole hotel." His threats were hollow echoes in the sudden, heavy silence of the lobby. The patrons had all stopped talking. The staff stood frozen. They were all watching the public dismantling of a man who, 5 minutes ago, had believed himself to be untouchable. Julian Thorne did not watch him go. His attention was solely on Alara. The red imprint of Marcus's fingers was already beginning to bloom on her pale skin. Her face was a mask of controlled shock, her breathing shallow. She was still holding the silver pitcher, a ridiculous anchor in the storm that had just broken over her. "Are you all right, Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice softer now. He had used her real name. The carefully constructed identity of Leah dissolved, leaving her exposed. The pitcher slipped from her numb fingers, landing on the thick carpet with a dull, muffled thud. The sound was a period at the end of a chapter of her life she had just been forced to close. Julian gestured to the alcove he had just vacated. It was a pocket of privacy in the very public space. He did not touch her, did not presume to offer a comforting hand on her back. Instead, he created a zone of safety with his stillness, waiting for her to enter it on her own terms. She walked the few steps on unsteady legs and sank into the velvet seat, her body trembling with the delayed reaction of adrenaline. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice thin. "I know more than your name," he said, taking the seat opposite her. He signaled a waiter, who appeared instantly. "Water and tea for the lady." He looked back at her. "I know your work. I recognized you 2 days ago when I came in for a meeting. I believe the last time I saw your photograph was in a 2018 issue of Architectural Digest, standing slightly behind Marcus Sterling at the unveiling of the Halcyon Tower." Alara stared at him, bewildered. The Halcyon Tower? That was years ago. "Genius does not have an expiration date, Miss Vance," he said simply. "I have followed Mr. Sterling's career with professional interest for some time. More accurately, I followed it until about 2 years ago. The work became derivative. It lost its soul. It lost that unique interplay of light and structural integrity that defined the Halcyon and the 2 projects that preceded it. It lost you." The directness of his assessment was stunning. He was not flattering her. He was stating a fact he had uncovered through dispassionate analysis. He had seen her, truly seen her, in the lines of a building, in the ghost of her talent that lingered in steel and glass. "The wallet," she whispered, the pieces clicking into place. "You knew it was me." "The wallet was a coincidence," he corrected gently. "A fortunate one. I confess, when I realized who you were, I was intrigued. To find an architect of your caliber working here was a dissonance I felt compelled to understand. Leaving my wallet was not a test, not intentionally, but your actions in returning it, with its contents untouched, confirmed the character I had hoped to find in the person who designed those buildings." He paused, his gray eyes holding hers. "Integrity. It is the most valuable and rarest of all building materials." A wave of something hot and sharp pricked at the back of her eyes. It was the treacherous sting of tears she refused to shed. For so long her competence had been taken, twisted, and used as a weapon against her. To have it recognized, to have it spoken of as a tangible, valuable thing by this stranger, was more disorienting than Marcus's rage. "He won't stop," she said, the words a stark admission of her reality. "Marcus doesn't let go of things he considers his." "I am aware," Julian said, the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. He sees you as an asset, a possession. He has not updated the file. He is working from a version of you that has never been accurate and is now dangerously obsolete. His corporate metaphor was strangely comforting, framing her trauma in a language of logical, solvable problems. Which is why you will not be returning to your apartment, and you will not be working another shift here. These were not suggestions. They were statements of a future that had already been arranged. I have a car waiting for you at the service entrance, he continued. It will take you to a private residence. It is secure. You will be safe there. Tomorrow morning, my legal team will contact you. We will discuss a restraining order against Mr. Sterling, as well as the intellectual property claims you are entitled to. He paused again, letting the information settle. And when you are ready, my company, Thorn Industries, has a contract we would like to offer you. It is for the position of chief architect for our new global headquarters. You will have a full team, an unlimited budget, and sole public credit for the design. We are not offering you a job, Miss Vance. We are offering you a kingdom to build. Alara felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. The world was tilting on its axis. Safety, a lawyer, a job. Not just any job, but the kind of project architects dreamed of their entire careers. It was too much, too fast. A lifeline thrown with such force it threatened to pull her under. Why? She asked, the single word encompassing a universe of doubt and suspicion. Men with power did not do things for free. There was always a price. Julian Thorne considered her question for a long moment. Because I am a businessman, Miss Vance, and I recognize a profoundly undervalued asset. It is my nature to acquire such assets and place them in an environment where they can achieve their full potential. It is, quite simply, good business. He leaned forward slightly. And on a more personal level, I find the work of bullies like Marcus Sterling to be inefficient. They destroy value. I create it. We are on opposite sides of a fundamental equation. A car sent to her door the next morning. It had sounded like the beginning of a fairy tale, but this was not a prince offering a glass slipper. This was a king offering a crown and a sword. The choice was hers, to stay in the cinders or to stand up and learn how to rule. She took a deep, shuddering breath. For the first time in 6 months, it did not feel like she was breathing in ash. It felt like she was breathing in air. Okay, she said. The car was a black sedan, silent and anonymous. It moved through the city streets with a fluid grace, a bubble of calm in the urban chaos. Alara sat in the back, watching the world slide by through the tinted glass. She was leaving one life and heading toward another, and the transition felt both terrifyingly abrupt and blessedly overdue. The residence was not a penthouse, but a discreet, elegant brownstone on a tree-lined street. The gate was opened by an older woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor who introduced herself as Eleanor, Julian's mother. Julian called, she said, her voice warm but firm. He said you needed a quiet place to land. Come in, dear. The tea is on. The house was a sanctuary. It was filled with books and art, comfortable furniture, and the smell of beeswax and old paper. It was a home, not a showcase. Eleanor Thorne did not pry. She did not ask about the fading bruises on Alara's arm or the haunted look in her eyes. She simply provided tea, a light meal, and conversation about art, history, and the stubbornness of the roses in her garden. She treated Alara not as a victim to be pitied, but as a guest to be respected. In doing so, she gave Alara a gift more precious than safety: normalcy. Over the next few days, Alara began to recalibrate. The constant, low-grade hum of fear that had been her companion for years started to fade. She slept through the night for the first time she could remember. Julian's legal team, a pair of sharp, impeccably dressed women, met with her at the brownstone. They were compassionate but clinical, walking her through the process of filing a restraining order and beginning the complex work of reclaiming the copyrights to her designs. They spoke of non-disclosure agreements and partnership contracts not as impenetrable fortresses, but as poorly constructed walls they intended to dismantle brick by brick. She asserted her independence immediately. She insisted on seeing the contract from Thorn Industries before she made any decisions. She reviewed her legal options with a meticulous eye, asking pointed questions and demanding clarification. She was not a damsel in distress waiting to be rescued. She was a professional re-engaging with her career. Julian respected this. He did not push. He did not hover. He sent documents via courier and made himself available for calls, but he gave her space. His power was not the loud, performative power of Marcus. It was deep, quiet, and structural. He did not need to shout to be heard. His actions were his voice. While Ilara was finding her footing, Julian was systematically dismantling Marcus Sterling's world. It was done without fanfare, a series of quiet, devastating moves on a corporate chessboard. His acquisition team bought the controlling interest in the primary lender for Marcus's firm, Sterling Architecture. The loan covenants were reviewed, and a dozen minor, previously overlooked infractions were suddenly flagged. A notice of default was prepared, held in reserve like a loaded gun. His research division compiled a complete portfolio of Ilara's work, cross-referencing her university projects and early drafts with the designs Marcus had later claimed as his own. The stylistic watermark was undeniable. A team of patent lawyers began preparing filings that would challenge the ownership of every major project in Sterling Architecture's portfolio. Finally, Julian made a call to the editor of Architectural Digest, the same magazine that had once published Ilara's photo. He spoke of a potential story, an exclusive on the real genius behind the Sterling style. It was a seed planted in fertile ground. Ilara, unaware of the full scope of these actions, began to feel the stirrings of her own creativity once more. In the quiet study of the brownstone, she began to sketch. The first lines were hesitant, rusty, but then they began to flow. Ideas for the Thorn Industries headquarters bloomed in her mind. A tower that was not a monument to ego, but a building that breathed with the city, that used light not as a decoration, but as a structural component. After a week, she agreed to meet with Julian to discuss the project. They met not in a boardroom, but in a quiet corner of the city's botanical garden, surrounded by the patient, silent growth of ancient trees. "Your mother is a formidable woman," Ilara said, breaking the ice. A rare, small smile touched Julian's lips. "She is the chairman of my personal board. Her judgment is unerring." He looked at the sketchbook Ilara held in her hands. "Have you had a chance to think about the proposal?" "I have," she said. She opened the book. Page after page was filled with elegant, daring sketches, notes scribbled in the margins. It was the work of a mind unleashed. "I have some ideas." For the next hour, they did not speak of Marcus. They did not speak of the past. They spoke of load-bearing walls and curtain glass facades, of sustainable energy systems and the psychology of public spaces. He listened with an intensity that was a form of respect, asking sharp, insightful questions. He saw the genius in her, not as a prize to be owned, but as a force to be collaborated with. A slow burn of a different kind began, not of passion, but of recognition. A meeting of two formidable intellects. He provided the safety and the resources. She provided the vision that could give his empire a worthy home. "I'll take the job," she said finally, closing the sketchbook, "on two conditions." "Name them," he said, his expression unreadable. "First, the contract must include a clause giving me final say on all aesthetic and structural decisions. No committees." "Done," he said without hesitation. "I am not hiring a committee. I am hiring you." "Second," she said, her gaze steady, "I want to be kept informed of every legal action taken against Marcus. I will not be a passive participant in the dismantling of my own past. I want to see the paperwork." Julian held her gaze. He saw the steel beneath her grace. She was not asking for vengeance. She was asking for agency. "That seems reasonable," he said. "My legal team will add you to all correspondence." He stood up, extending a hand. "Welcome to Thorn Industries, Miss Vance." She shook his hand. His grip was firm, his palm warm. It was the first time they had touched. It was not a brand of ownership. It was the seal on a contract between equals. Meanwhile, Marcus Sterling was living in a state of escalating delusion. After being unceremoniously ejected from the Grand Criterion, he had spent 2 days in a rage, followed by 3 days of arrogant certainty. "Give her a week," he told his junior partners, who were looking at him with a new, unsettling mixture of fear and pity. "She'll come crawling back. She can't survive without me." But a week passed, then 2. Ilara did not call. She did not appear. She had vanished. Then, the first legal notice arrived, a restraining order citing his actions at the hotel. It was a nuisance, an embarrassment, but he brushed it off as theatrics. The second notice was more serious. It was a formal challenge to the intellectual property rights of the Halcyon Tower. He laughed it off. He had coerced Ilara into signing documents years ago that handed him sole ownership of all their collaborative work. He believed his legal position was ironclad. He had not counted on the limitless resources of a man like Julian Thorne, whose lawyers specialized in finding the hairline fractures in ironclad agreements. His fatal miscalculation came when he discovered where Ilara had gone. A private investigator, hired at great expense, delivered a thin file to his desk. It contained photographs of Ilara Vance, looking healthier and more confident than he had seen her in years, walking into the main offices of Thorne Industries. With Julian Thorne. The news did not just wound Marcus's ego, it shattered it. Thorne, the one man in the city whose power and influence dwarfed his own. The idea of Ilara not just surviving, but thriving under the protection of a rival was an intolerable insult. His arrogance, blinded by rage, led him to his next mistake. He saw the upcoming Obsidian Gala, the city's most prestigious architectural awards ceremony, as his stage. He would confront her there, publicly. He would expose her as a faithless, ungrateful traitor. In his mind, he was the hero of the story, reclaiming what was his. He could not see that he was walking willingly into a meticulously prepared trap. The Obsidian Gala was the glittering apex of the architectural world, held in the grand ballroom of the city's Museum of Art. Light refracted from 1,000 crystal glasses, and the air buzzed with the low hum of power and ambition. Ilara stood near a soaring marble column, a glass of champagne untouched in her hand. She wore an emerald green gown, the color of new growth and precious things. Its lines were clean and architectural, a statement of the woman she was becoming. She was not hiding. She was not invisible. For the first time, she was present. Julian was by her side. He wore a tuxedo with the same quiet authority he wore a business suit. He had not been speaking much, but his presence was a shield. They were there because the Thorne Tower project was being officially announced, and he was to give the keynote address. He had insisted she be there, not as his date, but as his chief architect. She saw Marcus the moment he entered the ballroom. He was not on the guest list, but he had bullied his way past the front desk. He was drunk, his movements too sharp, his face flushed. He scanned the crowd with a predator's intensity, and his eyes locked on her. "It seems your former associate has decided to crash the party," Julian said, his voice a low murmur in her ear. He did not sound surprised. He sounded expectant. "I'm not afraid of him anymore," Ilara said, and was surprised to find that it was true. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear anger and a profound sense of pity for the diminished man walking toward them. Marcus pushed through the crowd, ignoring the indignant murmurs. He stopped in front of them, his eyes wild. "Ilara," he slurred, grabbing her arm, the same arm as before. "What is this? What are you doing with him?" "Let go of my arm, Marcus," she said, her voice steady. The repetition of the scene was almost theatrical, but this time the stage and the audience were much larger. "You have an obligation to me," he shouted, his voice cracking. Heads turned. The ballroom grew quiet. "Everything you are, I made you. That tower should be ours. You owe me." He gestured wildly at Julian. "Did you sleep with him to get this job? Is that your new talent?" The insult hung in the air, ugly and cheap. Ilara did not react. She simply looked at him, At the desperation and pathetic cruelty in his eyes, Julian stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of her. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. The entire room was listening. "Mr. Sterling," he began, his tone deceptively mild, "you seem to be operating under a number of misconceptions. Allow me to clarify a few things for you." He took out his phone. The simple, modern gesture was a stark contrast to Marcus's primal rage. He tapped the screen. "First, regarding your firm, Sterling Architecture. As of 4 p.m. yesterday, the primary creditor for your outstanding business loans, First National Banking Group, was acquired by the Thorne Financial Corporation. As the new lion holder, we conducted a review and found you to be in significant default. Your assets, including the firm itself, are now the property of a Thorne subsidiary. You are unemployed." Marcus stared, his mouth hanging open. That's not possible." "It is, I assure you," Julian continued, his voice calm and precise. "Second, regarding the intellectual property you claim to own. My legal team has uncovered the original partnership agreements you and Miss Vance signed a decade ago. Specifically, the clause you had her sign under duress, which we have ample evidence to prove. A court has issued a temporary injunction, reverting the copyrights for the Halcyon Tower and 3 other projects to their originator, Miss Vance." He looked at Marcus. "The work you built your entire reputation on is no longer legally yours to claim." A collective gasp went through the room. This was not just a private drama, it was a public execution. "Finally," Julian said, putting his phone away, "you mentioned an obligation. The only obligation present here tonight is the one a genius has to her own talent. An obligation Miss Vance is finally free to fulfill." He looked past Marcus at the sea of shocked faces. "Miss Vance is the chief architect of the new Thorne Tower. She is the most capable person in this room, and for years her light was hidden under a bushel by a man who was unworthy to even carry her blueprints." The world fell out from under Marcus Sterling. The swagger, the arrogance, the rage, it all drained away, leaving an empty, trembling husk. His face crumpled. He dropped to his knees on the polished marble floor. It was a complete and total collapse, a man imploding in public. "Please," he whispered, the word a pathetic rasp. He wasn't even sure who he was begging. Julian? Alara? The silent, watching crowd? He was begging the universe that had, in the space of 3 minutes, stripped him of everything he had ever valued. Security, the same discreet, efficient men from the hotel, appeared and gently lifted him to his feet. They led him away, a sobbing, broken figure, the ghost of a man who had once been a king. The ballroom was utterly silent. Then, Julian turned to the crowd. He walked to the nearby stage, taking the microphone from the stunned MC. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice now filling the room, calm and authoritative. "As some of you just witnessed, there has been a necessary correction in the record." He looked directly at Alara, his gaze a beacon across the crowded room. "Thorne Industries is not just building a new headquarters. We are building a new landmark for this city, and it is my distinct honor to introduce the visionary who will be building it." He extended a hand towards her. "The architect of the Thorne Tower, Miss Alara Vance." A tentative applause started, then swelled, growing into a thunderous ovation. It was an applause of recognition, of respect, of vindication. Alara walked toward the stage as if in a dream, the sound washing over her. She stepped into the warm spotlight, standing beside Julian. She looked out at the faces of her peers, the people whose respect she had craved for so long. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel vengeful. She felt still. The war was over. Later that night, they stood on the private terrace of Julian's penthouse, overlooking the glittering cityscape. The sounds of the city were a distant murmur below. The air was cool and clean. Alara had taken off her shoes, the cold stone a grounding presence beneath her feet. She leaned against the railing, finally letting out a breath she felt like she had been holding for years. A slow exhale, releasing the last vestiges of Marcus, of fear, of invisibility. "Thank you," she said, not looking at him. For everything. I did what was necessary, he replied, standing a respectful distance away, to protect my investment. There was a hint of dry wit in his tone, a small crack in his stoic facade that was more intimate than any declaration. She finally turned to look at him. His face was cast in the soft glow of the city lights, his expression unreadable as always, but his eyes held a warmth she had not seen before. Was that all it was? She asked softly. An investment? He considered the question. No, he said, his voice low. It was also a matter of principle. I believe things should be in their right place. Talent should be recognized. Integrity should be rewarded. You, Miss Vance, were incorrectly placed. A real smile touched her lips, reaching her eyes for the first time. Ilara. She corrected him gently. My name is Ilara. Ilara, he repeated, the name sounding right in his voice. He stepped closer, closing the space between them. I have a final proposal for you tonight, not as a CEO to an architect, but as a man to a woman. She waited, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. My life is very structured, he said. It is built on logic and control. You are a complication. A beautiful, brilliant, unforeseen complication. I find I am unwilling to let you go. He did not say he loved her. The words would have been too simple, too cheap for the complex, profound thing that was growing between them. Instead, he said, I don't leave because things become complicated. I stay. It was the most romantic thing she had ever heard. It was not a promise of a fairy tale, but a statement of intent, a promise of presence, of a partnership built not on passion's fleeting fire, but on the steady, enduring strength of bedrock. I don't leave either, Julian, she said, her voice clear and strong. I stay. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. It was a touch that asked permission, a touch that offered comfort, a touch that recognized her as a sovereign in her own right. She leaned into it, closing her eyes, feeling a sense of peace settle into her bones. A profound, quiet rightness. She was home. The weeks that followed were a blur of productive, joyful work. Ilara moved into her own apartment, a light-filled space she chose herself, but she spent most of her days at the Thorn Industries Design Studio, a state-of-the-art facility Julian had built for her and her new team. She was a brilliant leader, inspiring loyalty and creativity in the young architects who worked for her. She was demanding but fair, her vision clear and unwavering. The plans for the Thorn Tower were revolutionary, a masterpiece of form and function that would redefine the city's skyline. Her relationship with Julian deepened, not in grand romantic gestures, but in the quiet moments, in the shared meals over blueprints late at night, in the way he would appear in her studio with 2 cups of coffee just when she was starting to fade, in the long, comfortable silences they could share, watching the sunset from her apartment window. It was a family built from honesty, complication, and the daily choice to stay. One evening, months later, they were standing on the construction site of the tower. The foundation had been laid, a vast concrete footprint that held the promise of the future. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Julian stood beside her, looking at the raw, powerful beginnings of her vision. It's magnificent, he said. It's just the start, she replied, a contented smile on her face. She felt a sense of profound peace, the kind that comes from creating, not just enduring. She had taken the broken pieces of her life and used them to build a foundation stronger than she could have ever imagined. He reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. What comes next, Ilara Vance? He asked, his voice full of quiet wonder. She looked up at the sky, at the first star beginning to shine, then back at the solid ground beneath her feet. She squeezed his hand. We build, she said,